I'm Cassandra Vance, and at 26, I thought I knew grief. I lost my mother at 16, and years later, my father, Arthur Vance, the tech visionary who built an empire, passed away under mysterious circumstances. At his funeral, I was seated in the back like a guest. Not a single word about me in the eulogy. Then came the will reading. My stepmother, Serafina, sat front and center, ready to inherit everything. But I had something she didn't see coming. A sealed envelope from my father, and a truth that would unravel everything she built. That day, justice began to wake up. Before I share what was in that envelope and what Serafina did to stop me, let me know where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been pushed aside by someone who thought you wouldn't fight back. You're about to hear how one daughter took it all back. Growing up in a sprawling house in Malibu, I spent my childhood exploring tide pools and dreaming of the deep blue. My father, Arthur Vance, was a brilliant man, a self-made titan of the tech industry in Silicon Valley. He built his company, Vance Innovations, from the ground up, starting from a garage and turning it into a global powerhouse. He was fiercely intelligent, but also incredibly kind and devoted. My mother, Evelyn, was the heart of our family. She had this infectious laugh and a boundless capacity for joy. She taught me to see the magic in everyday things, from the intricate patterns of a seashell to the silent grandeur of a redwood forest. Then, when I was 16, just as I was navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence, a tragic car accident stole her from us. The world, as I knew it, shattered. For years, it was just Dad and me against the world. He became my rock, my confidant, my best friend. We had our own traditions, like our Saturday morning hikes up the Santa Monica Mountains, followed by breakfast burritos at the Golden Bean Cafe, where we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He'd listen to my teenage woes with a patience that only grew more profound with age, offering wisdom that always seemed to cut through the noise. "Cassie," he'd often say, his eyes twinkling, "always trust your gut. Your mother had an uncanny intuition, and you inherited that from her." Life slowly, painstakingly, began to mend. Then, when I was 20, a sophomore in college studying marine biology at UCLA, Dad met Serafina Thorne at a high-profile tech gala. She was stunning, poised, elegant, with an undeniable charm. She seemed genuinely interested in Dad, in his work, in his life. I was happy for him. After years of quiet grief, he deserved to find happiness again. But from our very first meeting, something felt off about Serafina and her two children, Brendan, who was 18 at the time, and Chloe, 16. Their smiles were a little too wide, their laughter a touch too loud at Dad's jokes, and their eyes lingered a little too long on the vintage cars in Dad's garage, and the original artworks adorning our walls. Still, I tried. I really did. I invited Chloe for coffee, attempted to connect with Brendan about his college applications. Dad was falling hard for Serafina, and I desperately wanted to support his happiness. "They just need time to warm up," Dad assured me when I mentioned the subtle coldness I felt from them. "They lost their father too, you know. Well, not lost exactly. He abandoned them, which might be worse." The wedding happened quickly, just 8 months after they met. I stood beside Dad as his best woman, forcing a smile as Serafina recited vows about honesty and devotion that to my ears somehow rang hollow. Changes happened almost immediately after they moved into our family home. Photos of my mother that had always held places of honor began to disappear, replaced by opulent portraits of Serafina and her children. Family heirlooms, cherished pieces passed down through generations, were rearranged or simply stored away to make room for Serafina's sleek, modern tastes. Our Saturday morning hikes and breakfasts dwindled. First, Serafina would create convenient conflicts. "Oh, Arthur, did you forget we have the Sutherlands coming over today?" Or, "Brendan has a track meet, and we should all support him as a family." When we did manage our father-daughter time, Serafina would call repeatedly with manufactured emergencies. Once she called 7 times because she couldn't find the remote for the home theater system, only for Dad to return home and find it exactly where it always was. Meanwhile, Brendan and Chloe treated my father's home and money as their birthright. Brendan wrecked 2 luxury cars in his first year of having a license, and Dad replaced them without a word of complaint. Chloe maxed out credit cards on designer shopping sprees, and Dad quietly paid the bills. I chose a different path. Though Dad offered to pay for my entire education and living expenses, I insisted on working through college. I took out modest student loans and worked part-time jobs at a local aquarium, not because I didn't appreciate Dad's generosity, but because I valued independence. "You are so stubborn, just like your mother," Dad would say with a proud smile. She never wanted handouts either. After graduating with my degree in marine biology, I took a job with an environmental consulting firm in San Diego. The distance hurt, but we maintained our close relationship with daily phone calls and monthly visits. During those visits, I noticed subtle changes in Dad. He seemed tired, less vibrant, his usually sharp wit a little duller. When I expressed concern, Serafina would interject, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes cold. "He's fine, Cassie. Stop being so dramatic. He's just slowing down a bit with age." Over the past year, Dad's health declined more rapidly. He developed heart problems, and his once robust frame became thinner, almost frail. During my visits, I noticed his medication seemed to change frequently, and he often appeared disoriented, his gaze distant. During my last visit, about 3 months ago, Dad asked Serafina to give us some privacy. When she reluctantly left the room, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Cassie, I need to tell you something important," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the door. "I've been making changes, setting things right. If anything happens to me, talk to Martha Higgins at the office. She has something for you." Serafina returned before he could elaborate, carrying a glass of water and several pills for Dad. "Time for your medicine, Arthur," she said sweetly, but her eyes were like chips of ice when they flicked to me. That was the last real conversation I had with my father. I called daily as always, but increasingly, Serafina would answer and claim he was resting or unable to come to the phone. When I did speak with him, he sounded foggy, his words slurring as if he were drifting through a haze. I planned to fly back to Los Angeles the following month to check on him in person, but I never got the chance. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was working late, finalizing a critical marine conservation report, when my phone lit up with Brendan's number. This was unusual. My stepbrother rarely contacted me directly. "Your dad's in the hospital," he said without preamble, his voice flat. "Mom told me to call you." My heart dropped like a stone. "What? No. What happened? Is he okay?" "I don't know the details. Mom just said to tell you he's in Pacific Crest Medical Center." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I booked the first flight to Los Angeles. A red-eye leaving in 3 hours. I packed haphazardly, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. The 4-hour flight felt like days, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. When I finally reached Pacific Crest Medical Center at 7 a.m., I rushed to the information desk. "Arthur Vance," I said breathlessly. "He was admitted yesterday. I'm his daughter, Cassandra Vance." The receptionist directed me to the cardiac care unit on the 4th floor. As the elevator doors opened, I spotted Serafina and her children in the waiting area. Serafina was dressed impeccably, as always, not a hair out of place despite the supposed emergency. "Serafina, how is he? What happened?" I asked, approaching them. She stood positioning herself almost imperceptibly between me and the hallway leading to the patient rooms. "Cassie, you didn't need to come all this way." The words were soft, but their meaning was a slap across my face. "Of course I did. He's my father. I need to see him." Serafina's expression hardened, a subtle shift in her features. "The doctors are allowing only immediate family at this time, dear. Arthur needs rest, not emotional scenes." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I am his immediate family. I am his daughter." "The doctors were very specific," she insisted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Family only, right now. We'll call you if there are any changes." Chloe smirked behind her mother, while Brendan at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, shuffling his feet. I approached the nurse's station, explaining that I was Arthur Vance's daughter and desperately needed to see him. The charge nurse looked confused. "The patient's wife indicated his only children were already here," she said, glancing toward Serafina. "That's his wife, but I'm his daughter from his first marriage," I explained, frustration building, my voice tight. "Please, I just need to see my dad." The nurse looked torn, caught in a family dispute she clearly wanted no part of. "Let me speak with Mrs. Thorne and the doctor," she finally said, her tone hesitant. I waited for hours. Serafina and her children were allowed in and out of Dad's room. their faces occasionally appearing in the glass, while I remained in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting area, my heart sinking with each passing minute. Eventually, a doctor approached me. "Miss Vance, I understand there's some confusion about visitation." I explained the situation, and he nodded sympathetically. "Your father is heavily sedated right now. His condition is serious but stable. We are monitoring his cardiac function. I will allow you a brief visit, but he likely will not be conscious." Relief, hot and fleeting, washed over me, but it was short-lived. As the doctor led me toward Dad's room, Serafina emerged and pulled him aside for a hushed, intense conversation. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. "I apologize, Miss Vance, but Mrs. Thorne has informed me that your father explicitly stated he did not want visits from anyone outside his household during this hospitalization. As his medical proxy, we must respect her decisions regarding visitors." I could not believe what I was hearing. My mind reeled. "That is not true. My father would never say that. Please, just 5 minutes." The doctor apologized again but remained firm, his face a mask of professional regret. Hospital security was called when I refused to leave the floor, my voice rising with desperation. Humiliated and desperate, I was escorted to the lobby, the cold linoleum floor feeling miles away. Over the next 3 days, I tried everything. I came during different shifts, hoping to find more sympathetic staff. I waited in the parking garage, hoping to catch doctors leaving, to plead my case, to ask for just a moment. I called the hospital administration, multiple times a day, every day. Nothing worked. Serafina had locked down access completely, an invisible, impenetrable wall around my father. On the 4th day, a nurse named Kim approached me in the hospital cafeteria. "You're Arthur Vance's daughter, right?" she asked quietly, sitting across from me. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep and crying. "Have you been caring for him? How is he doing?" She glanced around before speaking, her voice a low murmur. "I shouldn't be talking to you, but something doesn't feel right about the situation. Your father has been asking for you." My heart leaped into my throat. "He's conscious?" Serafina told everyone he was in a coma. Kim shook her head. "He has periods of consciousness. He's weak, but lucid at times. He specifically asked about his daughter, Cassie, yesterday morning." Tears, hot and fresh, filled my eyes, blurring the fluorescent lights. "Can you help me see him?" "I'll try," she whispered. "I'm working tomorrow night. Come at 11 p.m. when visitation hours are over and the floor is quieter. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to get you in briefly." That night, I barely slept, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that I would finally see Dad, finally tell him I loved him. But at 6:00 a.m., my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Vance, this is Dr. Kaplan from Pacific Crest Medical Center. I am very sorry to inform you that your father passed away about an hour ago." The world stopped. The room spun. "What? No, that cannot be right. He was stable. The nurse said he was conscious." My voice was a raw, strangled cry. "He suffered a massive cardiac arrest in the early hours. We attempted resuscitation, but we were unsuccessful. I am truly sorry for your loss. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I loved him one last time." And Serafina had ensured it would be that way. The funeral arrangements were completely controlled by Serafina. The service was scheduled at an upscale funeral home in Beverly Hills, a place of cold marble and polished chrome, rather than the small chapel where my mother's service had been held, where Dad had always said he wanted his own funeral. When I arrived at the service, an usher, a tall man with a somber face, directed me to a seat in the back, far from the family section where Serafina, Brendan, and Chloe sat in the front row, a picture of composed grief. I watched as person after person approached them with condolences, many glancing back at me with confusion, their brows furrowed. Some of Dad's oldest friends, men who had known him since his garage startup days, made a point of coming to sit with me or squeeze my shoulder in silent support, their eyes conveying a shared understanding of the bizarre situation. During the eulogy, Serafina painted herself as the devoted wife who had nursed my father through his illness, her voice soft and mournful. She spoke of their blended family while never once acknowledging me by name, a pointed omission that twisted a knife in my already bleeding heart. When it came time to view the body, Serafina's brother, Marcus, a hulking man I'd always found unsettling, physically stepped in front of me. "Family first," he said coldly, his eyes daring me to challenge him. By the time I was allowed to approach, they were closing the casket. My last glimpse of my father, the man who had been my entire world, was partial and rushed, a fleeting moment of cold, lifeless skin before the lid was sealed shut. At the reception afterward, held at a prestigious country club, I overheard Serafina speaking with a man I recognized as her lawyer, Mr. Gregory Harrison of Sterling and Ross. "We'll proceed with the reading on Tuesday," he said, his voice low and formal. "I have all the paperwork in order." "Good," Serafina replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "Arthur was very specific about his wishes. Everything is settled exactly as it should be." The smug satisfaction in her voice made my stomach churn, a bitter acid rising in my throat. I left the reception early, driving through a haze of tears back to my hotel. I had never felt so alone, so utterly defeated. Dad was gone, and Serafina had won. She had successfully cut me out of his final days and was clearly confident about what would happen next. That night, I sobbed until no more tears would come. I had lost not only my father, but also my last connection to the family I had once known. Little did I know, Dad had anticipated Serafina's behavior and had set in motion a plan that would change everything. 3 days after the funeral, I was still staying at the Palisades Hotel, near my childhood home, unable to bring myself to return to San Diego. I had taken bereavement leave from work, but had no real plan beyond that. The hollowness inside me made it difficult to think beyond each painful hour. A knock on my hotel room door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Serafina's allies had made it abundantly clear I was not welcome to linger in Los Angeles. When I opened the door, I found Martha Higgins, my father's executive assistant of 15 years, standing there looking nervous, her usually composed demeanor ruffled. "Martha, what are you doing here?" She glanced down the hallway before answering, her voice a hurried whisper. "May I come in, Cassie? I shouldn't be seen here." I stepped aside to let her enter, confusion temporarily displacing my grief. Martha had always been kind to me, a quiet, efficient presence in Dad's life, but we weren't particularly close outside of professional interactions. Once inside, she removed a flat, sturdy package from her large leather tote bag. It was a manila envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the unmistakable imprint of my father's signet ring, the one that had belonged to his grandfather, a heavy gold ring he wore every day. "Your father gave me this 6 months ago," Martha explained, handing me the package, her hands trembling slightly. "He made me promise to deliver it to you personally if anything happened to him. He was very specific that it should not be sent by mail or messenger and that no one else should know about it." My hands trembled as I took the envelope, the wax seal cold beneath my fingertips. "Did he say what it was?" Eleanor shook her head, her eyes wide. "Only that it was important and that you would understand what to do." She checked her watch anxiously. "I should go. Mrs. Thorne has been at the office daily since your father died, going through his files. She fired 2 people yesterday, trying to find something." After Martha left, I stared at the package, a mixture of dread and desperate hope swirling within me, afraid of what it might contain, yet desperate to connect with Dad one last time. Finally, with shaking hands, I broke the wax seal, the brittle sound echoing in the quiet room, and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten letter on my father's personal stationery, a legal document in a sealed envelope marked with the discreet logo of Chambers and Finch Associates, not my father's usual law firm, and a small antique-looking brass key taped to a card with an address and box number for West Coast Reserve Bank. With trembling hands, I unfolded my father's letter. "My dearest Cassie, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I am so sorry for the pain you must be feeling, and even more sorry that I will not be there to comfort you. I have made a terrible mistake in trusting Serafina. Over the past year, I have noticed disturbing patterns in her behavior, items disappearing, documents being moved, medications making me feel worse instead of better. My old friends suddenly unwelcome in our home. At first, I dismissed these concerns as paranoia, attributing it to my declining health. But then I found evidence that Serafina has been in contact with her ex-husband, Victor Moreau, the one she claimed abandoned her. The reality, as I discovered, is quite different. He never abandoned her. They've been in contact for years. I updated my will 6 months ago with a new law firm, Chambers and Finch. Serafina does not know about this. The enclosed document is a copy of this will, registered with the state. The key is to a safety deposit box containing evidence you may need if Serafina contests the will, as I suspect she will. It also contains personal items I wanted to ensure reached you. I had planned to confront Serafina once I had gathered sufficient evidence, but my health has deteriorated more rapidly than expected. I fear my time is running short. Remember that I love you, Cassie. You have been the greatest joy of my life. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you have become. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, a mixture of gut-wrenching grief and profound vindication washing over me. Dad had known. He had seen through Serafina's facade, the one that had fooled everyone else, and had taken steps to protect me and his legacy. The sealed legal document was indeed a will, dated just 6 months earlier and notarized by witnesses I did not recognize. I did not open it, maintaining its official seal intact, a silent testament to its authenticity. The next morning, armed with a fragile hope, I went to West Coast Reserve Bank. After verifying my identity and the key, the bank manager, a polite, stoic woman, escorted me to the vault and left me alone with the safety deposit box. The box contained several items. First was another letter from Dad, a more detailed one, explaining each piece of evidence. Then there were stacks of photographs, glossy prints taken by a private investigator, showing Serafina meeting with a man Dad identified as her supposedly estranged ex-husband, Victor Moreau, in various clandestine locations. There were also photos of the same man, Victor, visiting my father's house when Dad was away on business trips, slipping in and out unnoticed. More disturbing were the financial records, meticulously detailed printouts showing unusual large transfers from my father's personal accounts to offshore accounts linked to Serafina's brother, Marcus Thorne. There were also copies of my father's medical records, a thick file with notes in his handwriting questioning changes to his prescriptions that coincided with Serafina's trips to the pharmacy. A small, unlabeled thumb drive lay beneath the documents. I plugged it into my laptop, my fingers shaking, and listened. It contained audio recordings from my father's home office, capturing hushed conversations between Serafina and her children, discussing how they would spend their inheritance once the old man is gone. In one particularly chilling recording, Serafina instructed Brendan to ensure Dad took all his medication while she was away for the weekend. "Make sure he takes the blue pills first," she had said, her voice a low, insidious whisper. "They make him sleepy, so he won't fuss about the others." The final document was a handwritten timeline my father had created, tracking his health decline against Serafina's actions. He noted increasing fatigue and confusion after Serafina insisted on preparing his meals and managing his medication. As I reviewed everything, a horrifying picture emerged. My father had not just been taken advantage of financially. He had been systematically isolated, manipulated, and quite possibly medically abused. The question that haunted me, a cold dread in my stomach, was whether Serafina had merely exploited his illness, waiting for nature to take its course, or had actually accelerated his decline. With trembling hands, I repacked the evidence into my bag. Dad had provided me with everything I needed to challenge Serafina. Now I needed to find the right moment to use it. The day of the will reading arrived. I hadn't been officially notified, of course, but Dad's old friend, Mr. Davies, who had been my father's attorney for decades before being inexplicably fired by Serafina 3 months ago, tipped me off about the time and location. "Something stinks about this whole situation, Cassie," Mr. Davies had told me over coffee the previous day, his brow furrowed with concern. "Arthur would never have cut you out of his final arrangements, and switching attorneys after 30 years of friendship, it doesn't add up." I arrived at the opulent offices of Sterling and Ross Attorneys at Law precisely at 2 p.m. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfectly coiffed bun, looked startled when I gave my name. "Miss Vance, you're not on the list for this meeting," she said, after checking her computer with a frown. "I am Arthur Vance's daughter. I should be at the reading of his will." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding a relentless drumbeat against my ribs. She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones, then directed me to wait. A few minutes later, Gregory Harrison himself emerged from the conference room. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and his expression was one of mild discomfort. "Miss Vance, this is somewhat awkward, but the reading has already begun. Mrs. Thorne indicated you were aware you are not included in the proceedings. I stood my ground, my chin lifted. As Mr. Vance's daughter, I have a right to be present, regardless of the contents of the will. Harrison looked uncomfortable, a flicker of something akin to reluctant admiration in his eyes, but nodded. Very well, please follow me. When I entered the conference room, Seraphina's face registered shock, then anger, then a quickly composed smugness that was chilling in its familiarity. Brendan and Chloe sat on either side of her, along with Seraphina's brother, Marcus, and her personal assistant. What is she doing here? Seraphina demanded, not even looking at me directly, her voice sharp. As Mr. Vance's daughter, Miss Vance has requested to be present, Harrison explained, his tone neutral. Seraphina gave a theatrical sigh, a little shake of her head. This meeting is only for heirs named in the will, which Cassie is not. Arthur was very clear about his wishes. The calm certainty in her voice made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. I had not come this far to lose control now. I understand you are grieving, Seraphina, I said, my voice steady, revealing none of the turmoil inside. But I have a right to hear my father's wishes directly, even if he chose to disinherit me. Harrison looked relieved at my reasonable tone. Perhaps we can proceed. As I was saying, the will dated January 15th of this year stipulates that the entirety of Mr. Arthur Vance's estate, with the exception of specific personal items listed in Appendix A, is to be transferred to his wife, Seraphina Thorne, with secondary beneficiaries being her children, Brendan and Chloe Thorne. Seraphina shot me a triumphant look, a flash of pure, unadulterated victory in her eyes, which I met with a small, knowing smile that seemed to unsettle her slightly. Harrison continued reading the document, detailing the extensive assets my father had accumulated. The family home, valued at over $30 million, his company shares worth approximately $150 million, vast investment portfolios, vacation properties in Aspen and Lake Tahoe, and various personal collections of rare art and vintage cars. When he finished, Seraphina placed a hand over her heart, a practiced, saccharine expression on her face. Arthur always took care of us, she murmured, her voice laced with false emotion. He knew what was best for the family. Are there any questions? Harrison asked, looking around the room, his gaze briefly resting on me. This was my cue. I reached into my bag and removed the sealed document Martha had delivered. Actually, I said, rising slowly, my voice resonating with a quiet authority that surprised even myself. I believe there has been a mistake. All eyes turned to me as I walked to Harrison's position at the head of the polished conference table. I placed the document before him, the stark white envelope a stark contrast to the dark wood. What is this? He asked, frowning at the unfamiliar law firm seal of Chambers and Finch Associates. This, I stated, my gaze locked on Seraphina's now rapidly paling face, is my father's most recent will, executed and filed with the state of California 6 months ago. Seraphina shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. This is ridiculous. Arthur would have told me if he updated his will. Harrison, a seasoned professional, examined the document carefully, breaking the crisp seal and reading through the first few pages. His expression changed from skepticism to concern, then a growing bewilderment. This appears to be legally executed, while dated more recently than the one we have been discussing. It bears Mr. Vance's signature, which I recognize, and proper witness attestations. He looked up at Seraphina, his eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Thorne, were you aware of this document? Seraphina's face had drained of all color, leaving her features stark and almost skeletal. This is preposterous. It must be a forgery. Harrison continued examining the document, his finger tracing the lines of text. It contains language specifically revoking all prior wills and codicils. If this is authentic, it would supersede the will we were just reviewing. Read it, I said quietly, my voice firm. Harrison cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound, and began to read. The new will painted a very different picture of my father's wishes. Seraphina and her children were provided for with modest trust funds that would pay them a reasonable living allowance, but give them no control over the principal. The sprawling Malibu family home, the house I grew up in, was to be sold, with proceeds going to establish a charitable foundation in my mother's name, the Evelyn Vance Foundation for Ocean Conservation. The bulk of the estate, including controlling interest in Vance Innovations, was left to me. with specific instructions about continuing my father's legacy of ethical innovation and charitable giving, particularly in scientific research. But the most damning revelation came with a clause near the end, a chilling testament to my father's foresight and fear. In the event that my death occurs under circumstances that might be considered suspicious or premature, I direct my executor to authorize a full investigation, including toxicology reports and a review of all my medical treatment in the months preceding my death. Serafina's face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. Her carefully maintained composure had completely evaporated. "This is a lie, a complete fabrication." "Oh!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She turned to her children, her eyes wild. "Tell them, your father would never do this to us." Brendan looked stunned, his jaw slack, while Chloe began to cry dramatically, her sobs echoing in the sudden silence of the room. Harrison held up a hand, his expression stern. "Mrs. Thorne, please. This document contains a notary seal and witness signatures. It appears to have been filed with the state. If you contest it, we will need to proceed through proper legal channels." "Contest it? I will destroy it. Arthur loved me. He would never have done this behind my back." She was practically spitting the words, her face scarlet. "That ungrateful bitch, she turned him against me after everything I did for him." Her brother, Marcus, tried to calm her, placing a hand on her arm, but she shrugged him off violently, almost knocking him off balance. "Mrs. Thorne," Harrison said firmly, his voice cutting through her tirade, "I must advise you that outbursts of this nature will not help your position if you choose to contest this will. The language here is quite clear, and there are additional sealed instructions regarding potential investigations into Mr. Vance's death." At the mention of investigations, Serafina went completely still, as if a switch had been flipped. Her eyes darted to the door, as if calculating an escape route, then back to me, a desperate, cornered animal look in them. I remained calm, watching the scene unfold exactly as Dad had predicted. "Serafina," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I think we both know Dad saw through you at the end. This is his final message to you." "You know nothing," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper laced with venom. "Your father was a confused old man. He did not know what he was signing." Harrison, now visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, interjected. "I believe we should adjourn this meeting until we can verify the authenticity of this new document, though I must note that it appears to be in order, and the firm listed is reputable." "Verify it? There is nothing to verify. I am his wife." Serafina gathered her belongings frantically, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped her purse. "This meeting is over. My attorney will be in touch." She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking angrily on the polished floor, pausing only to spit final, chilling words at me. "This is not over, Cassie. Not by a long shot." Her children followed her out, Chloe still sobbing, Brendan looking back at me with an unreadable expression. A mixture of shock, confusion, and perhaps dawning realization. The room fell silent after their departure, the air suddenly lighter, yet still humming with the aftershocks of the confrontation. Harrison sighed heavily, rubbing a hand across his forehead. "Miss Vance, I apologize for the confusion. I had no knowledge of this updated will. This is quite a development." "I understand," I said, as I gathered my own belongings. The newly validated will clutched tightly in my hand. My father anticipated Serafina's actions. That is why he took precautions. As I walked out of that room, I felt a strange, profound sense of calm. Dad had reached out from beyond the grave to protect me and expose Serafina's true nature. The battle was far from over, but the first decisive victory was mine. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was chaos. Serafina refused to vacate the family home, the sprawling Malibu mansion, as required by the newly discovered will. She changed the security codes and instructed the staff not to admit me under any circumstances, threatening them with immediate termination. My phone filled with vitriolic text messages from Serafina, alternating between thinly veiled threats and desperate attempts to gaslight me about my father's mental state when he signed the new will. Her brother, Marcus, whom I had never trusted, left menacing voicemails suggesting I back off before things get ugly. The intensity of Serafina's reaction unsettled me deeply. I checked out of the Palisades Hotel and moved to a different one, using an assumed name for a few days, just to feel a bit safer. The next day, I met with Olivia Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney specializing in contested wills and estate fraud. She had a reputation for being relentless and brilliant, exactly what I needed. "Your father was clever, Cassie," Caroline said, her dark eyes thoughtful after reviewing the documents I brought her. "By creating the new will with an independent firm and filing it with the state, he established a strong legal position. Serafina can contest it, of course, but she will need to prove he was not of sound mind when he signed it, which, given your father's foresight, will be incredibly difficult," I assured her. "He knew exactly what he was doing, Olivia. He was scared of her." Olivia's expression grew serious. "The question is, how far did Serafina go? These medical records, your father's notes, the audio recordings. They suggest she may have been tampering with his medication." She paused, her gaze steady. "If that is true, Cassie, we are talking about potential criminal charges that go far beyond just the will contest. But proving it will be difficult. We need hard evidence." We developed a strategy to enforce the will while gathering more evidence about Serafina's actions. Olivia immediately filed emergency motions to freeze all estate assets and remove Serafina as executor, citing the explicit language of the new will and the concerning evidence from the safety deposit box. Meanwhile, Serafina launched a vicious smear campaign among my father's social circle. She told anyone who would listen that I had manipulated my declining father, taking advantage of his grief over a recent friend's death to convince him to change his will. Cassie always resented me. I heard she told the members of Dad's exclusive country club she couldn't accept that Arthur found happiness again after her mother died. She poisoned him against his new family. The bitter irony of her using the word poisoned was not lost on me. A week after the will reading, I returned to my hotel room to find the door slightly ajar. My heart raced, a cold dread seizing me. I called hotel security before entering. The room had been searched, not ransacked, but subtly, meticulously gone through. Items moved and rearranged, as if someone had been looking for something specific. Most concerning, the copies of Dad's medical records were missing from my personal documents, though I had fortunately kept the originals, along with the audio recordings and the second letter, in a secure off-site location. The hotel's security footage showed a man in a maintenance uniform entering my room, but his face was never clearly visible to the camera, obscured by his cap and the angle. The hotel manager was apologetic, but could offer little help beyond changing my room and adding extra security. The incident confirmed my fears. Serafina was desperate, and she was escalating. That evening, I received a surprising text from an unknown number. It simply read, "Need to talk, not with Mom. The daily grind tomorrow, 10 o'clock a.m. My heart leaped. It was from Brendan. I was wary of a trap, a setup, but curious enough to agree. I chose a public location and arrived early, securing a table in a corner where I could observe the entrance, ensuring I was not being set up. Brendan arrived alone, looking tired and conflicted, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous energy. He was dressed in a worn hoodie, not his usual designer clothes. I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted after ordering a black coffee, his voice low and tight. "Mom is falling apart. She's drinking all day, making frantic calls, and, burning documents in the backyard." My breath hitched. "Burning documents? What kind of documents?" I leaned forward, my gaze intense. He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I don't know exactly. Financial stuff, I think. She sent Chloe and me away when she realized we were watching. But listen, the thing is, I found some pills in her bathroom. Prescription bottles with your dad's name, but the labels partially torn off, like someone tried to remove them." My blood ran cold, a sickening realization dawning. "Brendan," I urged, my voice barely a whisper, "do you understand what that might mean?" He nodded miserably, his eyes finally meeting mine, clouded with a mixture of fear and dawning horror. "I'm not stupid, Cassie. She's my mother. But Robert, Arthur, he was good to us. And if she did something to him..." He trailed off, unable to complete the horrifying thought. "You need to tell the police," I urged, my voice firm. He flinched. "I can't," he whispered, fear flashing across his face. "But I won't lie for her either, if it comes to that." As Brendan was leaving, he paused at the door, turning back to me. "Chloe wants to talk to you too. She's more confused than I am. Mom has always controlled her, but she really loved Arthur. 2 days later, I met Chloe at a small independent coffee shop across town, far from the usual places her mother frequented. Unlike her usual polished appearance, Chloe looked disheveled, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble, her voice small and trembling. "Did Mom really get left out of the real will?" "Not entirely," I explained gently. "Dad set up trusts for all of you. You will be provided for, just not with the lump sums she expected." Chloe's face crumpled, her carefully constructed image of invulnerability crumbling away. "She promised me the beach house," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She said I could have it after Arthur died." She caught herself, looking horrified at her own words, her hand flying to her mouth. "Chloe, when did she start making those promises?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it. "I don't know, maybe a year ago." She twisted a napkin in her hands, tearing it into tiny shreds. "She talked a lot about what we would do after, but I thought she meant after he retired or something. I didn't think she meant—" I reached for her hand, a gesture of comfort, but she pulled away quickly, as if burned. "I should go. She'll know I talked to you." Despite my complicated feelings toward my step-siblings, I felt a surge of compassion for them. They had been raised by Serafina, shaped by her values and manipulations. In a very different way, they were victims too. The situation escalated dramatically the following week. Serafina appeared uninvited at a high-profile charity event my father had supported annually, a gala for a renowned tech innovation fund. She created a scene when she saw me there, speaking with board members about continuing Dad's legacy. "There she is," Serafina shouted, her voice shrill, pointing at me across the crowded ballroom, her eyes blazing with a dangerous madness. "The daughter who abandoned her father for years, then swooped in to steal his money." Security quickly escorted her out, as she continued to shout accusations, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. The incident made the local society pages, bringing unwanted and embarrassing publicity to the already complicated situation. That night, the anonymous threats began. First, a text from an unknown number. "Back off or regret it." Then an email with photos of me entering and leaving my new, anonymous hotel, showing I was being watched, my every move tracked. I reported everything to the police and to Olivia, who accelerated our legal proceedings. We learned that Serafina had hired a notorious probate attorney known for aggressive scorched earth tactics and dragging out estate cases for years, bleeding opponents dry with legal fees. "She's playing for time, Cassie," Olivia explained, her jaw tight. "Trying to force a settlement by making the process so unpleasant and expensive that you will give up." But Serafina had underestimated both my determination and my father's foresight. While reviewing my father's personal papers, documents that Martha Higgins helped me retrieve from a secure, off-site storage unit Dad maintained, I discovered detailed notes about Serafina's previous marriages. Dad had hired private investigators who uncovered something shocking. Serafina had been married twice before, not once as she had claimed. Her first husband, a wealthy older man named Julian Croft, had died suddenly of heart failure after just 3 years of marriage. Serafina had inherited everything, leaving his children from a previous marriage with nothing. The circumstances were disturbingly similar to my father's situation, a chilling premonition. Even more damning, Olivia's investigator discovered that Serafina's supposedly estranged ex-husband, Victor Moreau, the father of Brendan and Chloe, had never actually divorced her. They had staged a separation while maintaining a clandestine relationship, a fact documented in the surveillance photos Dad found in the safety deposit box. The web of deception was more extensive and terrifying than even my father had realized. Serafina was not just a gold digger. She was a practiced con artist, a black widow with a pattern of targeting wealthy older men. The question that kept me awake at night, a cold dread in my stomach, was whether she had simply waited for my father to die naturally, or had helped the process along. The police finally became directly involved when Serafina violated the temporary restraining order I had obtained. She appeared at a high-end restaurant where I was dining with Martha Higgins, screaming accusations and attempting to physically confront me before being restrained by staff. The responding officers took statements, and upon learning of the existing order, took the matter seriously. When they escorted Serafina out, I overheard one officer mentioning to his partner that she smelled like a pharmacy, a strong, sweet odor of various medications. The pieces were slowly, terrifyingly falling into place, but Serafina still had one desperate final move left to play. The court date for the preliminary hearing on the contested will arrived 3 weeks after the dramatic will reading. The courtroom was tense, filled with a palpable anticipation, as Olivia and I faced Serafina and her attorney Martin Drake across the aisle. Brendan sat behind his mother, his face a mask of discomfort, but Chloe was noticeably absent. Judge Eleanor Carmichael, a stern woman in her late 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and a sharp legal mind, reviewed the filings before addressing the court. Before we proceed, I want to be clear that I have zero tolerance for the kind of behavior described in these reports, she said, her voice a low rumble, looking directly at Serafina, who visibly flinched. Harassment, intimidation, and violation of court orders will not help your case, Mrs. Thorne. Serafina's attorney, Martin Drake, a smooth, silver-haired man, rose smoothly, radiating practiced composure. Your Honor, my client denies any harassment. These are simply family disagreements blown out of proportion during a time of immense grief. Judge Carmichael was unmoved, a faint flicker of irritation in her eyes. Save it for your arguments, counselor. Let's address the competing wills. The proceedings began with Drake presenting their case, arguing that the January will was valid, and the later will was either a forgery or signed under undue influence by me, preying on an ailing, vulnerable man. His arguments were polished, his delivery flawless, but light on actual, tangible evidence. When it was Olivia's turn, she methodically demolished their position. She presented affidavits from the witnesses to the newer will, sworn statements confirming Arthur's sound mind and clear intentions. She provided confirmation from the notary and the state filing records, demonstrating the will's indisputable legal validity. The most damaging blow, however, came with the testimony of Mr. Davies, my father's longtime attorney. He was a man of quiet integrity, respected in the legal community. Arthur called me approximately 7 months ago, Mr. Davies testified, his voice clear and steady. He expressed concerns about his wife's behavior and asked for recommendations for an independent attorney, as he wished to update his will without Mrs. Thorne's knowledge. He was of completely sound mind and explained his reasoning clearly and rationally. Serafina, who had been maintaining a veneer of calm, glared at Mr. Davies, a man who had once been a frequent dinner guest in their home, a trusted family friend. He met her gaze steadily, unwavering, before continuing. Arthur told me he had discovered financial improprieties and was concerned about his medical care. He believed Serafina was deliberately isolating him from his daughter and friends. Drake immediately objected, claiming this was hearsay, but Judge Carmichael allowed the testimony as crucial evidence of my father's state of mind and his motivations when changing his will. The most surprising and emotionally charged moment came when Brendan, despite his mother's furious whispered commands, asked to address the court. Serafina hissed at him to sit down, her eyes wide with a desperate plea, but he approached the witness stand anyway, his face pale but resolute. Under oath, Brendan described finding prescription bottles hidden in Serafina's personal effects. Bottles with Dad's name but labels torn. He recounted overhearing hushed, angry arguments between Serafina and Victor Moreau about speeding things up and taking care of business. He detailed witnessing Serafina explicitly preventing me from seeing my father in the hospital and fabricating excuses for Dad's absence from calls. Arthur was good to us, Brendan concluded, his voice breaking, tears welling in his eyes. He didn't deserve what happened to him, and Cassie, she doesn't deserve what my mother is doing to her now. Serafina's face was a mask of incandescent fury, a sight that sent a ripple through the courtroom. When Drake called Serafina to testify, she had with practiced skill composed herself, playing the role of the grieving, wronged widow. She spoke in a soft, mournful voice of my father's declining mental state, my alleged abandonment when I moved to San Diego, and the happy blended family that had been cruelly destroyed by my jealousy and greed. It was a convincing performance, designed to tug at emotional heartstrings, but it crumbled under Olivia's precise, methodical cross-examination. Using the meticulously detailed timeline my father had created, Olivia walked Serafina through specific dates and events, catching her in multiple glaring contradictions. Mrs. Thorne, can you explain why you told the court you were with your husband continuously during his final days? Yet credit card records from the evening before Mr. Vance's death show you dining at a high-end restaurant, Le Maurice, with a Mr. Victor Moreau. Olivia's voice was calm, but each question was a precisely aimed arrow. Serafina stammered, her composure cracking. That was a brief business meeting. Victor is my ex-husband. We were discussing the children. The same ex-husband you claimed abandoned you and your children, Olivia pressed, her voice unwavering. The man you repeatedly told Arthur Vance you never wanted to see again. The one you said caused you so much pain. That is not relevant to this proceeding, Drake interjected, his voice strained. Olivia turned to the judge, her expression unyielding. Your Honor, it speaks directly to Mrs. Thorne's credibility and her pattern of deception. Her entire case rests on her portrayal of a devoted wife. This directly refutes it. Judge Carmichael agreed, a thin smile playing on her lips, and Olivia continued her methodical dismantling of Serafina's testimony. By the time she finished, Serafina was visibly shaken, her carefully constructed facade shattered, reduced to a trembling, red-faced woman. When all arguments concluded, Judge Carmichael took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. Her voice was crisp, clear, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Based on the evidence presented, I find the will dated July 15th to be valid and enforceable. The earlier will is hereby declared revoked. Mrs. Thorne is removed as executor of the estate, and Miss Cassandra Vance is appointed in her place, as specified in the valid will. Serafina gasped audibly, a choked guttural sound, while a wave of overwhelming relief, so profound it made my knees weak, washed over me. The judge continued, her gaze direct and unwavering. Furthermore, given the concerning allegations and evidence presented, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder abuse, fraud, and misconduct related to Mr. Vance's death. Mrs. Thorne is ordered to vacate the family residence within 48 hours and turn over all financial records related to Mr. Vance's accounts immediately. As we left the courtroom, a plainclothes man approached us. Miss Vance, I'm Detective Liam Miller from the Los Angeles Police Department. I'd like to speak with you about your father's medical records. A cold certainty settled in my heart. The true battle was just beginning. Over the next several weeks, the full, horrifying extent of Serafina's deception unfolded. The police investigation revealed that Serafina had never legally divorced her second husband, Victor Moreau, making her marriage to my father potentially invalid. A stunning revelation that meant she had committed bigamy. More disturbingly, toxicology tests ordered on preserved samples of my father's blood from the hospital, samples secured thanks to my father's foresight, and Olivia's swift action, showed elevated levels of a powerful heart medication he had not been prescribed, a drug that could severely depress cardiac function in high doses. Serafina's carefully constructed house of cards collapsed completely when Chloe, in a moment of remorse, or perhaps self-preservation, turned over a small leather-bound journal she had found hidden in her mother's belongings. In it, Serafina had meticulously tracked my father's medication, noting which combinations made him most compliant and forgetful, which dosages caused him to become most disoriented. Criminal charges were swiftly filed against Serafina for fraud, elder abuse, bigamy, and as an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Victor Moreau was charged as a co-conspirator. While the legal process would take months, even years, to fully resolve, Serafina's reign of terror was effectively over. The media coverage was intense and painful, turning our deeply personal family tragedy into a public spectacle. Headlines like, "Beverly Hills Black Widow Strikes Again," and "Daughter's Detective Work Unveils Deadly Plot," screamed from tabloids and news feeds. I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on honoring my father's legacy and rebuilding what Serafina had tried so desperately to destroy. As I sorted through my father's belongings in the family home, now emptied of Serafina's cold, modern presence, I discovered treasures she had hidden away. Photos of my mother that had disappeared from display reappeared in forgotten drawers. Letters they had written to each other during their courtship, fragile with age, lay tucked inside an old desk. Even my childhood art projects, finger-painted masterpieces and awkwardly drawn stick figures, which I thought were long lost, my father had carefully preserved in his study, behind a false panel in his bookshelf that Serafina had apparently never discovered. Inside that secret compartment, I found a collection of videos my father had made over the years. Some were from my childhood, grainy footage of birthday parties and summer vacations. Others were more recent, poignant reflections on his life and hopes for the future. The most recent was dated just 2 months before his death. In it, his face was thin and tired, but his eyes, though a little hazy, were clear and steady as he looked directly into the camera. "Cassie," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "If you are watching this, then things have gone as I feared they might. I want you to know that I realized my mistake with Serafina, and I have done everything I can to protect you and what we built together." He paused, emotion overcoming him momentarily, his eyes welling up. "I should have trusted your instincts about her from the beginning. You have your mother's wisdom, my girl. I hope you can forgive my foolishness." Tears streamed down my face as I watched, unable to stop them. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered to the screen, my voice choked with emotion. "Remember what matters," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Not the money or the properties, Cassie, but the values we share: integrity, compassion, perseverance. Those are your true inheritance, and no one can ever take them from you." In those moments, watching my father's final messages, I felt him with me again, not just in memory, but in spirit, his love a tangible presence. Despite Serafina's best efforts, she had failed to destroy the bond between us. In the end, love and truth had prevailed. 6 months after the courtroom confrontation with Serafina, I finally moved back into my childhood home. The process of reclaiming the space was both painful and healing. I had considered selling it, as specified in the will, but after careful consideration and consultation with Olivia, the estate attorneys, I decided to maintain ownership and convert part of the property into the headquarters for the Evelyn Vance Foundation for Ocean Conservation, named after my mother. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of my inheritance, would focus on supporting marine research, advocating for ocean protection, and providing resources for children who had lost parents, particularly to environmental disasters or illnesses. It felt like the perfect way to honor both my parents' legacies. As I wandered through the renovated spaces, memories of my childhood mingled with the fresh paint and new furnishings. I had removed most traces of Serafina's cold, modern aesthetic, restoring the warm, comfortable style my mother had originally created. Martha Higgins, who had continued working for Vance Innovations during the transition, joined me for tea in the sunroom that had always been my mother's favorite space. "Your father would be so proud, Cassie," she said, looking around at the transformation, a soft smile on her face. "He was so worried near the end, not just about the money, but about his legacy being twisted, about what would happen to you." Did he ever tell you what first made him suspicious of Serafina?" I asked, pouring her another cup of Earl Grey. Martha nodded, her gaze distant, recalling. "It was something small, actually. He noticed her removing photos of your mother from his bedside table when she thought he was asleep. When he confronted her, she claimed she was just dusting them, but it started him thinking about other changes she had made, how isolated he had become." We talked for hours about my father's final year, filling in gaps in my understanding. Martha shared stories I had never heard, including how my father had secretly maintained contact with many of his old friends despite Serafina's strenuous efforts to cut him off. "He never stopped talking about you, Cassie," she assured me, her eyes kind. Every achievement, every call, those were his brightest moments. The legal proceedings against Serafina continued to unfold. She remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the charges, and her substantial flight risk, a dangerous woman. Brendan had agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity from any accessory charges, a difficult but brave choice. Chloe's situation was more complicated. Psychological evaluations suggested she had been severely manipulated by her mother throughout her life, creating an unhealthy dependence. She was receiving therapy while staying with her biological father's sister, a kind, understanding woman. Despite their role in the painful events surrounding my father's death, I could not bring myself to abandon Brendan and Chloe entirely. They had been victims of Serafina's machinations too, raised in an environment of deception and materialism. After much reflection, I established college trust funds for both of them, using a small portion of my inheritance. The trusts were structured to encourage education and independence, values my father had championed. Brendan was already enrolled in community college, working part-time, diligently trying to define his own path away from his mother's toxic influence. The family home gradually filled with the items that had been placed in storage when Serafina redecorated. Family heirlooms returned to their rightful places of honor, including my grandmother's antique grandfather clock that had always stood in the entrance hall, its gentle ticking a soothing presence, and the collection of intricate sailboat models my father and I had built together over the years, now proudly displayed in his study. 3 months after moving back in, I organized a memorial service for my father at his favorite sailing club in Marina del Rey. Unlike the formal, impersonal funeral Serafina had arranged, this gathering was intimate and authentic. Dad's oldest friends, his sailing buddies, his early business partners, shared stories that made us laugh and cry, celebrating the complex, generous, brilliant man he truly was, rather than the sanitized version Serafina had presented to the world. Arthur always said that a person's true wealth was measured by the lives they touched, not the assets they accumulated, Mr. Davies said, raising a glass in tribute, his voice thick with emotion. By that measure, he was the richest man I ever knew. As I listened to the stories, I realized how much of my father's life I still had to discover, even after his passing. Each person who spoke revealed new facets of him I had never seen, expanding my understanding of the remarkable man who had raised me. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. Some days, grief would overwhelm me without warning, a heavy wave crashing down. Other days, a hot, searing anger would flare when I thought about the precious final moments with my father that Serafina had stolen from me, the conversations she prevented, the goodbyes I never got to say. The knowledge that she had deliberately hastened his death for financial gain was a wound that might never fully heal. Yet, amidst the pain, I found unexpected gifts. The adversity had revealed my own strength and resilience, a quiet, unyielding power I didn't know I possessed. I had discovered allies in unlikely places and learned to trust my instincts, just as my father had advised years ago, a lesson I would carry with me always. Most importantly, I had honored my father's final wishes, protecting the legacy he had worked so hard to build, and ensuring his true story was told. As the seasons changed, I gradually established new routines and traditions. Saturday mornings, once reserved for hikes and breakfast with Dad, became my time for volunteer work with a children's grief support group, offering comfort and sharing my own journey. The holiday season, which I had dreaded facing without him, became an opportunity to host a warm, intimate gathering for others who had lost loved ones, creating a new sense of family. One spring morning, as I sat in my father's study, reviewing foundation proposals, my gaze fell upon a quote he had framed on his desk. It was simple, yet profound. The greatest inheritance a parent can give their children is a few minutes of their time each day. Despite his immense success and vast wealth, my father's most valuable gift had always been his presence, his unwavering attention, his quiet understanding. That was the legacy I wanted to honor most in my own life going forward, giving my time and attention generously to causes and people who truly mattered. The legal system eventually delivered its verdict on Serafina. After a lengthy trial, she was convicted on multiple counts, including fraud, elder abuse, bigamy, and accessory to involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 20 years in state prison. The news brought a complex mix of emotions, not the triumphant satisfaction I might once have expected, but a quieter sense that justice had been served, and that my father, finally, could rest in peace. I kept my promise to visit Brendan and Chloe occasionally, meeting them on neutral ground as they worked to build lives independent of their mother's toxic influence. These relationships remained complicated, often fragile, but I remembered my father's boundless capacity for forgiveness and tried to embody that spirit. Looking back on the turbulent journey, from that devastating phone call about my father's hospitalization to the peaceful, purposeful life I was building now, I recognized how much I had grown. The pain had transformed me, burning away naivety and replacing it with a hard-won wisdom. The betrayal had taught me to value authenticity and to recognize manipulation, even in its most subtle forms. The loss had deepened my appreciation for genuine connection, for the people who truly show up for you. My father's final gift had not been the inheritance that Serafina had coveted so desperately. It had been the truth, painful, difficult, but necessary, and the opportunity to reclaim not just his assets, but his true legacy of integrity, compassion, and unwavering love. As I stood at my father's grave on the anniversary of his death, the California sun warm on my face, I placed a bouquet of white roses, his favorite, beside the headstone. "I kept my promise, Dad," I whispered, a gentle breeze rustling through the nearby trees. "Your story was told. Your wishes were honored. Your legacy continues." The journey through grief and betrayal had taught me that family is not always defined by blood or legal ties. Sometimes it is created through shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care. My father had understood this truth at the end, making provisions not based on traditional definitions of family, but on the authentic bonds he cherished. That understanding has become my guiding principle as I move forward. I choose carefully who I allow into my inner circle now, valuing character over charm, substance over appearance. The wealth my father left me provides security, a means to do good in the world, but it is the wisdom gained through our shared ordeal that proves most valuable in navigating life's complexities. If you have experienced betrayal within your family, or found yourself fighting for what is rightfully yours, I hope my story offers some comfort and guidance. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never underestimate the power of truth to eventually prevail. Family conflicts around inheritance can reveal people's true characters, often in shocking ways. Have you experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to healing. Remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from surviving our deepest wounds.